Thank you very much. Okay. Welcome everyone to St Felix, to our catechesis night. Special welcome to those who are back, who haven't been for a while. And to those, especially to the new faces who are here. We're very happy to have you guys here. And we are so privileged today to have one of the best homegrown Catholic teachers and apologists speaking to us today. Robert comes from years of experience. He's worked in schools and universities, spreading and defending the Catholic faith. He taught at St Charles, and now he works in Sydney Catholic schools as the head of new evangelisation. He's also married with 4 kids, 2 sons and 2 daughters, one who I've had the privilege of personally meeting. Just going to add that in there. And welcome. Without further ado, speaking on what is true and false about Christmas, Robert Haddad.
Thanks for the introduction. I come here often, not necessarily to this group, but to these churches, this church and the schools here, because the primary school has been very good to me. They've had me over many times to present to parents, and this year I spoke to the students here, Year 9 students in the secondary school. But most important for me is that actually my faith life began in this parish. Of course, back in 1964 there were no Maronite parishes in this part of town. The only one would have been at St Maroons at Redfern. And I got baptised here on the 9th of August 1964. How do I know? Is because I had to get my baptism certificate when I was a young adult. I wasn't confirmed as a young person. I remember, because I only went to public schools, I never went to Catholic schools, and my faith practice was very, patchy. That I was going to Green Acre Primary, and I was receiving catechism from an old nun named Sister Patrick. It was very strict, very tough. This is 1973, so I was 9 years of age, and she actually asked questions about where I was in my faith life, baptism, first Holy Communion, things like that. And she said that I needed to be confirmed. I went home to my dad and I said, the nun at school said I have to be confirmed. And my dad said, no, you don't need that, that's all right, you don't need that. So I wasn't confirmed, but when I had a much deeper, much stronger conversion in my early 20s, obviously I felt that I should be confirmed. So I got confirmed as an adult in the cathedral by Cardinal Clancy with other young adults. And that was a very important moment in my life. I think I got a lot of strength from the sacrament of confirmation to deal with issues I had at the time and to conquer those issues at the time. So I had to get my baptism certificate in order to be confirmed, and so I came back here and found out the date when I was baptised. So I presume it was in the font that's still there. So if you ever get to know where you were baptised, the date of it, and make it a special point in your faith life, I think that would be a good thing to recognise and value your baptism, because that's when your faith life formally begins. All right, I'm talking about Christmas, and I've entitled the talk, What's True and False About Christmas? It's a pretty hard-nosed talk, and you use language like true and false. People don't talk like that anymore, or most people don't talk like that anymore. I don't want to get too technical, but we have a problem in modern society called postmodernism, and that means we no longer believe in objective truth. So many people your age say, well, what's true for you is not necessarily true for me, and we make our own truth. Or even worse, even deeper, there is no such thing as truth. Or if there is truth, we can't discover it. We doubt our senses and our intellect to be able to perceive and understand truth. Of course, this is all the fruit of centuries of false philosophies. Sanity is with Catholicism, and Catholicism meaning the philosophical and theological tradition of Catholicism, and particularly St Thomas Aquinas, what's called the moderate realist school of philosophy, which is about reality. And the departures from that period, from the late Middle Ages, which began in the Renaissance, accelerated in the Reformation, and really gained momentum in the Enlightenment, had done enormous damage to our culture and society, enormous damage. Only in recent years, with further reading that I've done, I've come to realise the extent of the damage that the Enlightenment has caused. You might have heard of the term Enlightenment, and then normally you're talking about the 18th and 19th century philosophers. Really, their project was really to dismantle the philosophical tradition of Aristotle and Thomas Aquinas. And they are remotely responsible for the chaos we have today. So I'm deliberately going around talking about true and false, because we need to re-establish this binary mindset, that there are things that are true and that we can know they're true, because our senses are reliable and our intellect is designed by God for us so that we can understand things as they really are in their natures. And there is such thing as false. I've already diverted off the talk radically, but I'll just start with this point, then I'll get onto the topic, because it's very interesting. When I did university chaplaincy, particularly in the years 2006 to 2008, I met this extremely intelligent young man. He was only 19 years of age, and I had it all over me in philosophy. I was really out of my depth when I had conversations with him. He used the term, I'm an alethetic skeptic, and that means I'm someone who believes there is no such thing as truth and that we can't know truth. And he was absolutely adamant, radically adamant, that there is no way, shape or form we can know anything for certain to be true. But nevertheless, he was a very good guy, and when we met from time to time, our conversations were very pleasant, very amicable. Anyway, I lost contact with him for a couple of years until one day, it would have been in early 2008, my final year in chaplaincy, when I was walking from Redfern Station to the university, and I happened to come across him. He's getting out of his car, and he's wearing his academic gowns. I know what that means. He's about to graduate. And an old woman comes out of the car as well, and I see him, and I call out to him, and hi, how's things, and shook hands, and what's happening today? Well, I'm graduating, and I said, and I just pointed to the old woman, and he said, that's my mother. And then I went up to him and I whispered in his ear, are you sure that's your mother? And then he had this terrifying look on his face. Because even though I couldn't argue with him necessarily at the philosophical level, I got him at the emotional level of family. I mean, he knows that's his mother. And he knows that for sure. So he knows something for certain. And he also knows for certain that he's graduating that day, and in what degree, and he knew for certain how to get to the university. So the reality is that modern philosophies are leading humanity to madness. And so we have to endeavour, wherever you are, to continue the crusade of getting out there and making it clear to people, particularly young people, that there is such thing as truth, and hence there is such thing as falsity or non-truth. Okay, well, back on the topic now, and what's true and false about Christmas. And I love Christmas. I've always loved Christmas. I've been always enchanted with Christmas. When I was very young, I was radically enchanted about baubles and Christmas trees and tinsel and Bethlehem stars and going shopping and buying Christmas presents, etc. And you grow out of that. So by the time I'm 13 and 14, I'm over that, and the Christmas holidays mean, being away from school and watching cricket and maybe going to the beach here or there. And so Christmas is there, but not really in the centre. But when you get married and you have kids, and then they begin to realise what Christmas is, and they get enchanted by it, as a parent you rediscover all that. And that's what I've been through in the last, say, 15 years. So I'm a big supporter of Christmas, and for Catholics, even though most Catholics think that Christmas is the most important feast and celebration of our liturgical year, no, it's not. It's actually Easter, Good Friday, Holy Saturday, the resurrection on Easter Sunday. That's the most important time. Nevertheless, Christmas is a huge feast because you don't get Calvary, you don't get the resurrection unless Christ first came into the world with a human nature and became a member of our family, and I'll revisit that later on. In history, we've had some radical opposition to Christmas from other religious groups, fundamentalist groups or fringe sectarian groups. In England, when the Calvinists won the Civil War in the mid-17th century, it was a civil war where they overthrew the Church of England. The Church of England overthrew the Catholic church in England, and then the Calvinists overthrew, for a very brief period, the Church of England, the High Church in England, in the 1640s through to 1661. For an 11-year period, the Calvinists ruled England under Cromwell. That's Oliver Cromwell. And as Lord Protector, and they abolished Christmas. Christmas for them was a Catholic, papist and semi-pagan feast that wasn't truly Christian and had to go. And now the problem with the Calvinists, they'll kill joys anyway. They believed it was a sin to enjoy anything. So if you see anywhere today, particularly in the United States, if you see a billboard that advertises ice cream or chocolate and calls it wicked, the remote foundation for that attitude is Calvinism. To believe that to enjoy something is a sin and wicked is Calvinism. That's not the Catholic faith. We believe to enjoy sin is a sin, not to enjoy innocent good pleasure, because we're made to enjoy pleasure. The Jehovah's Witnesses today likewise reject Christmas on the grounds that it's pagan. It was originally that day, December 25, a pagan feast, and the Catholics have really, since Constantine in particular, the apostate church of Rome, the apostate church of the beast, etc., has, brought paganism, mixed it with authentic Christianity, corrupted authentic Christianity, and they see themselves as a movement that purifies Christianity and therefore gets rid of these, remotely pagan feasts such as Christmas. All right, well look, I could end the talk right now and say we're justified to celebrate Christmas because the first Christmas, that is the time when Jesus was born, was celebrated. And it was celebrated by the angels, and we read that in Luke 2:13 to 14, where we have the angels appearing, and the Greek word strategoi is that they appeared like a battle array. They appeared in formation in the heaven, in the skies, and they were seen and they were heard, and they were singing glory to God in the highest, and peace on earth to men, or that is people of goodwill. So they were celebrating, the angels celebrated publicly the birth of Christ in the world. So in the end, why not celebrate like the angels did, the birth of Christ in the world? The first thing we need to have a look at about Christmas, what's true and false, is what year and what day Jesus was born. And I've only recently changed my mind on this, and I've come to the conviction that actually December 25 is the original and true date of the birth of Jesus. For decades I thought no, and I'll tell you the reasons why for that. Well, firstly, the scriptures are totally silent on the year and the day Jesus was born, and one reason was because culturally the Jews did not make a big deal about birthdays. The only two birthdays that are mentioned in the Bible, one in the Old Testament and one in the New Testament, is the birthday of Pharaoh, and this is the Pharaoh that was opposed by Moses, and the birthday of Herod Antipas. And both of those men were associated with murder, and they were not good figures. They were enemy figures of the people of God. So, Jews didn't think a big deal about birthdays at that time in their history from a religious perspective. What do we know for certain from scriptures about when Jesus was born? Well, the data in scripture tells us that Jesus is born in the reign of Herod the Great. Now, most people for many years have believed that Herod the Great dies around 4 BC, 4 years before the birth of Christ. But Jesus is born before Herod the Great dies. So Jesus must be born no later than 4 BC. Could be as early as 6 BC. And if you're confused there, I understand. So how can Jesus be born 4 or 6 years before the birth of Christ, when he is Christ? Okay? And the reason for that is a simple mistake made in good faith by a Greek monk in the 5th century called Dionysius. His surname, they didn't have surnames there, his nickname was Exiguus. So it was Dennis the Short. No relation of mine, thankfully. So he honestly tried to work out in the 5th century, how many years it was from the birth of Christ until his time, and he made a sincere calculation, which we've stuck to. So when we say this is the year 2019, we're following the calculations of Dionysius Exiguus, that ancient Greek monk. When in actual fact, this is not 2019, it could be 2021, it could be 2023, 2, 4, we're not sure. But when we celebrated the millennium, that is at the 1st of January 2000, you were probably very late to the party, because the party should have happened anywhere between 2, 4, or even 6 years earlier, in the mid-1990s. Okay, but an author that I'm a very great fan of, an author called Abbot Ricciotti. Now, Abbot Ricciotti wrote a number of books throughout the 20th century, particularly around the mid-20th century, which I highly recommend you reading, particularly his Age of Martyrs, the History of Israel, and The Life of Christ. I've read all those 3 books, and he's a phenomenal writer. He's a very exciting writer. When you're reading Abbot Ricciotti, you really can't put him down. And he is firm in the view in the 1940s that Jesus is born in the reign of Herod the Great, who dies 4 BC. And his surmising is that Jesus is probably born around 6 BC, because Herod the Great, when he finds out from the 3 wise men following the star that they've come to worship the newborn king, and Herod pretends, okay, let me know where he is so I can come and worship him as well. When the 3 wise men return back to their lands and betray Herod the Great, and Herod the Great is furious, he goes and sends soldiers to kill all the male children in and around Bethlehem who are up to 2 years of age. So what we have to know about the gospel accounts is that they're compressed. They're not chronologically in order, because the writers don't think like modern writers today. So when we think about the birth of Jesus and the Star of Bethlehem and the 3 wise men and Herod the Great sending his soldiers to kill the infant Jesus, we're thinking this happens within a few week period, 2 or 3 weeks. In actual fact, it could be up to 2 years, that period. So Abbot Ricciotti puts it that Jesus is born maybe up to 6 BC, and that's why when you read Abbot Ricciotti later on, he's telling us that Jesus dies in AD 30 at the age of 36. And I was very surprised to read that, because I've always believed that Jesus dies at the age of 33, and I still believe that, because Abbot Ricciotti now, his view has been superseded, and for good reason. So there's another recent author, like some of you might know him, some of you know the work of Catholic Answers and James Aiken, and he wrote an article very recently for Catholic Answers magazine arguing for the fact that Jesus was probably born either 2 or 1 BC. So later than what Abbot Ricciotti says. And what's the reason for that? Well, again, Jesus is born in the reign of Herod the Great, and new evidence tells us that Herod the Great probably died later than 4 BC, as late as 1 BC. And that the census that is issued by Augustus Caesar that compels St Joseph and Our Lady to leave Nazareth to go to Bethlehem was not a census for the purposes of collecting tax. That is an error in the translation of the King James Version. It is a census for registration. For what purpose? For everyone in the empire to acknowledge that Augustus Caesar was the first citizen, or the princeps, the first citizen of the empire. And we know as historical fact that there was such a census ordered by Augustus around 2 BC. And so the historians are linking the census that's mentioned in the Gospel of Luke with this historically known census. So St Joseph and Our Lady are moving from Nazareth to Bethlehem somewhere around 2 to 1 BC. But you also have to understand, things moved a lot slower in ancient times than they do now. If we have a census in Australia, the whole country does it on the same night, because we've got the means to do it. If Augustus orders a census in Rome for the whole empire, it might take 2 or 3 years before it's conducted throughout the whole empire, because things, of course, moved very slowly in those days compared to today. But Aiken also looks at the scriptural data, which is quite simple, really. When we go to the Gospel of Luke, Luke 3 verse 1, it says there that John the Baptist begins his ministry in the 15th year of the reign of Tiberius Caesar. And Tiberius Caesar becomes emperor in AD 14. That's a fact, undisputed. So if John the Baptist begins preaching and baptizing in the 15th year, he's begun baptizing and preaching around the year AD 29. And then Luke tells us that very shortly afterwards, Jesus appears to John the Baptist to be baptized, and he is, quote, about 30 years of age. So Jesus is about 30 years of age around AD 29. So that means Jesus, according to this chronology, is born 1 BC, no later than, or no earlier than 2 BC, in that range, which will fits in with what we know about this historic census of Augustus Caesar, which was ordered around 2 BC. The church fathers themselves, if you don't know who they are writers from the year basically AD 80 with Clement of Rome, St Clement of Rome, right up to St John Damascene, the last church father, AD 749. Those writers, whoever wrote about when Jesus was born, are quite unanimous that he's born in the 25th year of the reign of Augustus Caesar, which is around 2 BC, thereabouts. So I'm pretty comfortable to say that Jesus is born around 2 to 1 BC. And so what year is this now? It's probably 2020 or 2021 at the latest. All right? So Dionysius still got it wrong, but not as wrong as we originally thought. What day was Jesus born? Now, for decades, I've thought 25th of December is just a liturgical date chosen to be comfortable with March 25. Because even when I was very young, I remember when I was in primary school, our scripture teacher tells us that, you know, December 25 is actually only chosen by the church because it's arbitrarily chosen by the church. We don't know the original date. It couldn't have been December 25 because that is winter in the northern hemisphere. And if it's winter, it's cold. And if it's cold, the shepherds are not out with their sheep and goats at night. Well, that's ahistorical. It's actually has no historical basis whatsoever. And if you go to the Holy Land now, and you're there during winter, it's not that cold. I mean, some of you might have been in Lebanon in winter. I have, and it's not that cold if you're on the coast. So it's like Sydney winter, 15, 16 degrees Celsius. And sheep, in particular, are made to endure the cold weather. That's why they have wool, to keep them warm in cold weather. And if you go out there today, particularly if you go on that drive from Jerusalem to Jericho, you'll still see Bedouins out there encamped along the hillsides, very beautiful hillsides. It's all desert, but it's very beautiful. And they got their goats and their sheep out at night, all year. So that particular argument, you know, it wasn't December 25 because that's winter, it just doesn't hold any water anymore. The other more important argument that was raised as to why Jesus was not actually born on December 25 was the argument that December 25 was chosen by Christians as the birth of Christ to supplant the pagan worship of the invincible sun, Solus Invictus. Now we're very close now to what's called the solstice. Now we've lost all significance of the solstice in modern mindset. You need to know the significance of this. I'm going to shortly afterwards give you an education and other things that we've got wrong, that we've lost the original sense of. When we look at the seasons, we mark the seasons according to calendar dates. So we're in summer now, and we say summer begins on December the 1st. and that autumn will begin on the 1st of March, and winter on the 1st of June, and spring on the 1st of September. That's the modern way we do it. That's completely wrong. The ancients didn't do it that way. They did it the ancients were far more intelligent than we give them credit for, because they determined that the beginning and end of seasons according to the solstices and the equinoxes. And they could measure, and they knew very well, and ancient civilizations 4,000 BC knew this. Because we know the Egyptians and the Druids in England building their monolithic constructions in these times were doing it in relation to the solstices and the equinoxes. So the equinox are 2 days a year. There are 2 equinoxes. And they are March 21 and September 21. The equinox is when the length of daylight and the length of darkness are precisely the same. Equal, hence equinox. The solstices is when you've got the extremes of the shortest length of daylight and the longest length of darkness, or vice versa, the longest length of daylight and the shortest length of darkness. So we're coming right now to December 21. It's a few days away. December 21 for us in the southern hemisphere is the summer solstice. It's that day which is the longest period of daylight of the year. And it's also this day with the shortest length of nighttime, darkness. In the northern hemisphere, it's the opposite. So in the northern hemisphere, it's the winter solstice, the shortest period of daylight and the longest period of darkness. When we go to June 21, it's the reverse. So for us on June 21, it's the longest period of darkness and the shortest period of daylight. And in the northern hemisphere, the opposite. The longest period of daylight and the shortest period of darkness. These were the formal beginning and ends of seasons. So summer begins for us December 21, not December 1. Winter in the northern hemisphere begins December 21. What's this got to do with Christmas? It's because when the ancients measured the length of daylight and darkness, they began to perceive that the length of darkness in the northern hemisphere, or the length of daylight in the northern hemisphere, began to increase again on December 25. So it's the shortest daylight, December 21, then it levels off, and on December 25 they can begin to measure that the length of daylight is rising again. So in their minds, in their pagan mindset, the sun has died, or they're dying and rising gods. There are various gods, but those gods died on December 21 and then rose again on December 25, or were reborn on December 25. So they had all these various pagans festivities where they celebrated the rebirth of these gods on December 25. So according to this theory, the Christians did this, the early church did this, there's no doubt about it. They would baptize pagan feasts and say, okay, instead of celebrating the birth of Solus Invictus on December 25 or Saturnalia on December 25, let's celebrate the birth of Christ on December 25. It was used to supplant the celebration of the birth of pagan gods. And that's how we can wean these pagans off these false celebrations onto true celebrations. And that's a very powerful theory, and that's one I certainly believed in for many, many years, if not decades. Because it makes sense and it's consistent with early church practices. There's nothing wrong to believe it, but is it historical necessarily? And the evidence now tells us that it wasn't. So the theory was, we've got this Solus Invictus feast on December 25, and the Christians said, hey, let's celebrate the birth of Christ on that day as well. But the problem with this is that we've got writings from early Christians who talk about Jesus being born on December 25. That's just a matter of fact. And the feast of Solus Invictus was not inaugurated in the Roman Empire until the year 275. And we've got Christian writings before 275 saying we celebrate the birth of Jesus Christ on December 25. And there's no writings in any church fathers, whether they be Chrysostom or Augustine or anyone else, Epiphanius of Salamis, anyone else, and I'll read you their quotes in a moment. None of them talk about this great Christian conspiracy to supplant any pagan gods and the celebration of the birth of pagan gods with the celebration of Christ. All these people who wrote about Jesus' birth being December 25, they wrote it as a matter of fact, believing that it was actually December 25. So we've got St Hippolytus, who wrote in the year 204, 70 odd years before the Emperor Aurelian instituted the Feast of Solus Invictus, that Jesus was born on December 25. Same we've got for Chrysostom. He wrote in the year 386 the work on the incomprehensible nature of God. He says the birth of Jesus was December 25. Augustine says in his work The Trinity, the Trinitate, in the year 408, that December 25 is the actual birthday of Jesus. We've got St Epiphanius though, he's different. He wrote a work called the Panarion in the year 375, and he says the birth of Jesus was actually January the 6th. And we still have Eastern churches today, for example the Ukrainian Catholic, who celebrate the birth of Jesus on January the 6th. We have Clement of Alexandria much earlier, in the year 194, says that Jesus was born November 18, in the year 3 BC. We don't have any reasons given by him. He also mentions there are some people who believe Jesus was born May 20th. I wouldn't like that day because my birthday is May 21. So if Jesus was born May 20th, I'd only get one set of presents per year, which is one set of presents more than I actually get at the moment. So anyway, look, I think this is all historical interest. You know, you'll get Jehovah's Witnesses knocking on your door and saying Jesus wasn't actually born December 25. Well, you actually can say that's been the Catholic tradition, Christian tradition since ancient times. But ultimately, what matter is it? What importance is it? It's not of ultimate importance what day or what year Jesus was born. It is important to some extent. It is important to actually assert absolutely that Jesus was born, because we've got this growing movement called mythicism. And mythicism is a movement out there and it's gaining traction. It's still fringe, but it's gaining traction, that Jesus never existed. Is a myth. You can get onto YouTube, you see plenty of videos, academic videos, debunking the existence of Abraham as a historical figure, or Moses as an historical figure, particularly the Exodus as a historical event. And you've got a growing movement debunking Jesus of Nazareth as a historical figure. And if you think they won't really get traction, think again, because when the Soviet Union existed, their official creed, which they drew from an author called Drew, D-R-E-W, who wrote a work, I think it was called The Jesus Myth or something akin to that. Their official creed of that great empire was that Jesus never existed. He was just a myth. So it's important to assert that Jesus did exist and was therefore born, and you can assert December 25, but ultimately we just celebrate it because the angels did originally, and it's a good thing to celebrate. It ties in with March 25, obviously. December 25 ties in with March 25. And it sits neatly in the ancient world's calendar, because this is something else we've got wrong. We've got the measurement of the beginning and end of seasons wrong. We've also got the months, the year wrong. We say 1st of January is New Year's Day. No, it's not. In the ancient world, when Jesus was born, the New Year's Day was the 1st of March. The first month in the ancient world was March, and that was dedicated to the Roman god Mars, the god of war. I can give you the ancient names that the Romans had. March was named after the god Mars, the god of war. April was named after the goddess of love and beauty, Aphrodite, hence April. May was named after the Roman goddess Maia, which was the goddess of spring. June was named after the goddess of marriage and female well-being, Juno. July, let me get this, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. it was, I don't know the original name, but it was called July after Julius Caesar, because Julius Caesar reformed the calendar. The Romans had the same calendar for about 650 years, and then Julius Caesar reformed it, and we had the Julian calendar up until the 16th century, 1583 to be precise. England kept it and Sweden kept it for much longer, into the first 3 decades of the 18th century, the Julian calendar. Then we've got August. Now August was originally called Sextilia, the 6th month. Changed to August in honour of Augustus Caesar. And then you've got these months which are numbered: September, October, November, December. They are named after Roman numbers. Sept, 7th, Oct, 8, Nov, 9, Des, decimal, decade, 10. So you can see it now that December is really the 10th month, not the 12th month. November is the 9th, because the March was the first month. And February, we'll get to January, Janus, the god of gates and doors. So people can say January is a good month to have as the first month of the year, because it's the door to the new year. Because Janus was the god of doors and gates. And February was named after Februar, the Roman festival of purification. And it's the last month, and hence the shortest month, got the leftover days. But the Romans sometimes in their period for many decades, centuries, had a 13th month called intercalaris. Because for example, as the Muslims do, they have a lunar calendar. So they have 13 months based on the cycle of the moon, the full moons. So there's a new month every 28 days. And so the Romans at times had an extra month in the year called intercalaris. Why am I saying this? Because the church said it was very appropriate to have the Feast of the Annunciation, the beginning of Christianity, celebrated at the beginning of the year, in the first month. And they placed it on March 25 to be precisely 9 months before what was the accepted date of Jesus' birthday. So if Jesus is born December 25, that's put in place first. You go back 9 months, oh, that's nice. It's be March, first month of the year. Beginning of the year, we'll celebrate the beginning of Christianity, and we'll put it on March 25 to time it perfectly 9 months with December 25. Okay, I hope you're learning something here, because we've got a lot to learn. What else have we got wrong? So we've got the dates for the seasons, beginning and end of seasons, wrong. We've got the months of the year wrong in their numeration. We've got the number of years from the time of Christ's birth wrong. We've got the days of the week wrong as well, because we all know that the first day of the week is not Monday. First day of the week is Sunday. Have a look at the names of the week. You look at some European, and I think we do this in Arabic. I don't know Arabic. You know it a lot better than me, so I won't use any Arabic words because I'll only embarrass myself. But how do we numerate the days of the week in Arabic? Who would volunteer that? You'd say it loudly.
So we say Monday is the first day of the week in Western culture, but in Arabic it's Tanen, which means the second day. Second day,
very good. Not the first day. And what's Tuesday called? The third day. And what's Wednesday called? The fourth day. And what's Thursday called? Khamis, right? Okay. And what's Friday called? Right. I don't know why. Do you know why?
I don't know actually.
Okay, we'll research that. And what's the Saturday called?
Sabbath.
That's right. That's right. It comes from the Jewish tradition. It was the Sabbath, and it was the 7th day of the week. And what's Sunday called?
Had.
Which means what? Well, see, in Europe, they call it, in Europe, the Europeans are a little bit ahead of us. We're doing well in the Middle East, but the Europeans are a little bit ahead of us because they call that Domenica, the Lord's Day. Okay? Now, look what we've got here in the English-speaking world. We've got Sunday, we've got Monday. They're pagan names. That Sunday is named after the god, the sun god. And Monday is named after the moon god. Okay, now it's a subtle repaganisation that we haven't picked up on. Okay, But anyway, so when Christianity gained traction and began to take over society and culture, it Christianized everything. Now we are in a process of de-Christianization. Secularism, the virus of secularism, is infecting and destroying everything about Christian culture. It's conscious, it's deliberate, and it's relentless, and will not stop. Okay? Until when you're my age, many of you are probably, I can tell, 20s, 30s, maybe 40s. I won't say any older than that. But when some of you in your late 20s, early 30s get to my age, you're going to be living in a very scary society, more scary than it is now. Because this will not stop at some neutral non-Christianity. It will move towards a virulent anti-Christianity and hostility. Christianity was conceived and born in a world that was hostile to Christianity and sought to destroy it for over 250 years. And my feeling is that we're heading back to that society. We're heading back to that type of world where there will be more than white persecution, more than mockery and politically correct mindset, politically correct dictatorship, mind control. We're going to move towards outright hostility and making Christianity illegal, making it a criminal offence, as it was in the days of the Roman Empire. It was a capital offence to be a Christian in the Roman Empire, from the time of Nero until Constantine. So all you needed to adduce in a court case for evidence to be sentenced to death is that you were a Christian, or called yourself a Christian. And my gut feeling is that we're heading back in that direction. Sorry for making your Christmas a very positive one, but I think we need to be realistic without being pessimistic and without being morbid and, putting up the white flag or heading for the hills running away. We need to have a reality about this. The word Christmas is a very Catholic word. Christmas. Very virulent anti-Catholic Protestants back in the 16th century and afterwards and today will not use the word Christmas because they're hostile to the Mass. They believe it's a blasphemy. They don't accept it. They believe we're re-crucifying Christ when he was crucified once and for all as an historical event. That we won't go into that. That's another topic. But what does it mean from our perspective, from the Catholic perspective? It's the Mass where we celebrate the birth of Christ. And so, I see less and less Christmas decorations now. I see far less public manifestation of Christmas decorations. But, when I'm growing up in the 70s, you'd have Christmas, you'd have season's greetings, Merry Christmas, you'll also have Xmas. And a lot of people objected to that, the Xmas, because they saw that as a supplanting of the word of Christ. And it can be, but originally it has a Christian origin because the X is not an X, it's the Greek letter chi, which is the first letter for Christ. So it's an abbreviated way of saying Christmas using the Greek letter chi, C-H-I, looks like an X, okay? Now, you're probably thinking, okay, that's a flimsy excuse. It's still, it's still a conspiratorial move to remove the name of Christ there. And I think you're right to some extent. I think some people are very comfortable to put Xmas because they're not comfortable with the name of Christ. Now, I wanted to say something. It's very difficult to say the name Jesus Christ in public because of our culture today, the political correctness, the embarrassment that it eschews when we say Jesus publicly. When I'm on interview panels, I'm digressing again here, but when I'm on interview panels at work, and particularly for REC positions, Religious Education Coordinator, and if a Religious Education Coordinator is very relaxed to say the name Jesus Christ, I tell you what, they're going to get the job from me. Because I can tell there's something different there, there's something deeper there. And that's what we need in the classroom. That's what we need as leaders in our schools. And I'm seeing them. It's more and more appearing. Very good, young, courageous people. What about the 12 days of Christmas? We know it as a Christmas carol. And you probably think, what's this all about? You've got turtle doves and French hens and calling birds and golden rings and geese a-laying I'll go through it here. Swans are swimming, maids are milking, 9 ladies dancing, 10 lords are leaping, 11 pipers piping, 12 drummers drumming. What's this nonsense? It's got nothing to do with Jesus Christ. Robert, you just said we need to be talking about Jesus Christ when it comes to Christmas. So what's there about Jesus Christ in this Christmas carol, the 12 days of Christmas? Understand that Christmas originally was a 12-day feast. So you'd have Christmas Eve, and then you'd have right through to the 6th of January, where we celebrate the coming of the 3 wise men, etc. I should also mention something about the 3 wise men. I will after this. So remind me, after I do this Christmas carol, we'll do the 3 wise men, because that's important to remember. This Christmas carol is very important. It comes from the Reformation period, Catholics persecuted in England under Elizabeth. Again, it was a death sentence in England to be a Catholic and who would not give allegiance to the crown and acknowledge the king or queen as head of the church in England. And if you harboured a priest or had mass said in your home, it was an automatic death sentence, particularly in Elizabethan England. So the Catholics, who are a very persecuted minority, would catechise their children in subtle ways, and this was a catechetical tool for an underground church. So 2 turtle doves represented the Old and New Testament. 3 French hens represented faith, hope and love. 4 calling birds represented the 4 Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke and John. 5 golden rings represented the first 5 books of the Old Testament. The 6 geese are laying were the 6 days of creation. The 7 swans are swimming were the 7 gifts of the Holy Spirit. The 8 maids are milking are the 8 Beatitudes. The 9 ladies dancing are the 9 choirs of angels. And the 10 lords are leaping are the 10 commandments. And the 11 pipers piping are the 11 faithful apostles after Judas. And the 12 drums drumming are the 12 points of belief in the Apostles' Creed. Now the idea of the 12 days of Christmas, I studied in year 11 a Shakespearean work called Twelfth Night, which related to the 12th night in the season of Christmas. I didn't realise it at the time, what I was studying. This whole thing about how we celebrate the whole Christmas event, where we have Jesus and his birth on the 25th of December, which I believe is actually the date. And then we have the 3 wise men coming, and we celebrate that on the 6th of January, the Epiphany, the manifestation of Christ to the world. I will look at this in more detail. I forgot. But since I've started it, I'll mention it. But I'll mention it from this perspective of the contradiction or apparent contradiction in the Gospels between Luke and John and Luke and Matthew. I said apparent contradiction because there is a contradiction prima facie when you look at it. When you read Luke's Gospel, and it has Joseph, Mary taking the baby Jesus to the temple for his purification, the purification of Mary and the presentation of the infant Jesus in the temple when he's 40 days old. And that was in obedience to the Levitical law. We read it in Leviticus chapter 12. And then after that, you've got Simeon and Anna, and you've got Simeon's prophecy about what's going to happen to Jesus. You know, he's a sign that will be contradicted, and to Mary, a sword will pierce your soul so that the secret thoughts of many may be revealed. It's very dramatic. And then Luke says afterwards, they go back, they leave Jerusalem, they go back to Nazareth. Luke mentions nothing, absolutely nothing, about the star of Bethlehem, the 3 wise men, the plot of Herod to destroy the infant Jesus, the escape into Egypt. And then they come back a couple of years later and end up going, not to Bethlehem, but again up north to Nazareth. So Luke says they leave Jerusalem, they go back to Nazareth. Why doesn't he mention all these other things? So scripture scholars of the skeptical school say that Matthew made it all up. There was no such thing as a star and wise man and massacre of the innocents, because when you read histories like Josephus' history of the Jewish people, and he's got a lot to say about Herod the Great, Josephus mentions nothing about a massacre of innocents in and around Bethlehem. Wouldn't you think if such an important massacre would get historical mentioned in someone like Josephus. Well, I've read some work, Catholic responses to this. Josephus fails to mention many things about the life and times of Herod the Great and other massacres he committed. We can't think of the massacre of the innocents in Bethlehem as some huge event that is numerically huge. It was after only boys 2 years or younger in and around Bethlehem, and scholars say that would have been somewhere between 12 and 20 kids, which is a disaster. It's a great evil, but it's not like thousands that were killed by Pharaoh, who tried to cull the number of boys being born in ancient Egypt in the, maybe 13th century BC or thereabouts. Okay, so it's a relatively small massacre compared to other atrocities Herod committed, but of significance for the Christians because it fulfilled certain prophecies. A voice was heard in Ramah, lamentation and great weeping. It was Rachel weeping for her children because none were left. That's a prophecy that Matthew takes from the Old Testament, from the book of Jeremiah, and embeds it into his gospel. We don't know why Luke doesn't mention all these events. We can hypothesize only. Was Luke written first? He knew nothing about Matthew's gospel. But Luke says he does great research to get everything chronologically and otherwise correct for Theophilus, a more detailed account. We can only hypothesize. But the skeptical school says, oh, Matthew is a liar, he made it all up. What happens, and Luke is right, because the Holy Family eventually do go back to Nazareth, but maybe 2 to 3 years later, okay, via a long digression to Egypt, where St Joseph Our Lady and the infant Jesus would have gone to Egypt, and they lived in Alexandria, which was on the western side of the Nile Delta, which is a very big city at the time, perhaps the second or third largest city in the known world at that time. And it was a great metropolitan, cosmopolitan metropolis, Greek-speaking, but there was a Jewish quarter there of Jews who become very Hellenized, that is, very Greek in their language, because that's why they had to have an Old Testament written for them in Greek. And it's that Old Testament that the Christian gospel writers use when they embed prophecies, fulfill prophecies of the Old Testament into their New Testament writings. Well over 80% of all Old Testament quotes embedded in the New Testament, 300 plus out of 350 embedded in the New Testament, are taken from this Greek Old Testament, what's called the Septuagint. The code is LXX if you read it in scholarly works. The Septuagint, written by 70 scholars who translated the Hebrew to the Greek for the Jews living in the Greek-speaking part of the world. All right. How are we doing? I've been talking a lot, but I hope you find this interesting. The Incarnation is something we need to celebrate, and we celebrate that at Christmas. What's the Incarnation? It's when God becomes man, when God takes on a human nature. God, the person, the second person of the Blessed Trinity, the Word, the eternal Word, becomes flesh. As John says in his Gospel, and the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. So we have one person of the Trinity, the second person of the Blessed Trinity, with a divine nature, with the divine nature, with the divine intellect, with the divine will, takes on a human nature, assumes a human body, a human soul, a human intellect and a human will, while remaining only one person, not two persons. Okay? This divine person owns the whole human nature. It's not shared with a human person. And the purpose of that is to give infinite value to the crucifixion, so that it's accepted by God, infinitely meritorious, as atonement for the sins of the entire world. If it was any part of the human nature of Christ was owned by a human person, then the sacrifice in Calvary would not have been of infinite meritorious value to atone for the sins of the entire world. But this is significant. The Incarnation is significant for another reason, because then God not only becomes man, but becomes a member of the human family. Because on the cross, he's representing the human family. He offers a sacrifice as a paschal lamb to the Father to atone for the sins of the human family, which was originally headed by Adam. And Christ joins that family, the family of Adam, as the new Adam. And that's through the Incarnation and his birth through the Virgin Mary, which we celebrate at Christmas. It was insufficient in the eyes of God the Father from a legal justice perspective that Jesus would just come into the world as a man with a true human nature and end up on the cross for humanity, because he wouldn't have been a member of the human family. It's not the human family that's offering the reparation, the infinite reparation. The human family sinned, the human family had to make the infinite reparation, but we couldn't do it because we're limited creatures. So God solves the problem by becoming one of us, and he becomes a member of the human family through Mary's yes. Mary is a daughter of Adam, sinless because of the Immaculate Conception, but the appropriate garden in which the seed can be received and grow, that is Christ, take on a true human nature and be born with that true human nature free from sin and be the perfect sacrificial lamb on the cross. And that's on our behalf and can be accepted by God the Father on our behalf because he's a member of the human family. And that's why Christmas, another reason we should celebrate it, for that reason. When do we have the first midnight masses? We have it around the year 430. It was Pope Sixtus III who inaugurated the midnight mass. I've stopped going to midnight mass. I don't have the strength to survive it anymore. My last midnight mass was 1997. And I'm just getting too old and too tired. But it's worthwhile because we believe that Jesus is born around that time, you know, in midnight but soon thereafter, etc. So that's what we're commemorating. What about the Christmas tree? Is it true or false? It's very true. It's very beautiful. When I used to go to Mass at St Mary's Cathedral when I used to work in the city in the late 80s, before I started at St Charles, you see in the cathedral there every Advent, they put up a very large Christmas tree, much bigger than what they've got now. And they used to have two columns of names, one on the left, one on the right. And one column was the name of all the prophets who foretold the coming of Christ. And the other list was all the genealogy of Christ going back, I can't remember to who, maybe to David. It could have gone back to Abraham, it could have gone back to Adam. Because Matthew gives us the genealogy of Christ going back to Abraham, through David. And we have Luke giving us the genealogy of Christ going back to Adam. So this tree is called Jesse tree, or Joshua tree. And Joshua is the actual name of Jesus. When he was in Nazareth, he was called Yeshua, Joshua. So Jesus comes to us in English through the Greek, but he wasn't called Jesus. It wouldn't have sounded like Jesus in the village. He was called Yeshua. And Yeshua, Joshua, the ancient Old Testament figure, successor to Moses, is a prefigurement, a type of Christ. And Joshua means Yahweh saves. And the new Joshua, or the new Yeshua, Jesus, is Yahweh saving humanity. Jesse is the father of David. So when you read the Old Testament, you get Boaz marrying Ruth, and they have Obed, who's the father of Jesse, who's the father of David. And David is born about 1,000 years before Jesus. That is the family line. That is the Davidic line. Because the prophecy is that David would be the father through which the Messiah would come into the world. And that the Messiah would be born into the world in the village or the town of David. So we read 2 Samuel 7:12-13. This is a quote. Moreover, the Lord declares to you, that's David, that the Lord will make you a house, the house of David. When your days are fulfilled, that is when David is dead, and you lie down with your fathers, I'll raise up your offspring after you. So it'll be from the seed of David one day, not known at the time, it will be 1,000 years, but it will be 1,000 years later, who shall come forth from your body, and I will establish his kingdom. He shall build a house for my name, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever. So the angel Gabriel, when he appears to the Virgin Mary, says, the Lord God will give him the throne of his father David, and he'll reign over the house of Jacob forever, and his reign will have no end. So the angel has announced to Mary that this prophecy in 2 Samuel 7 is about to be fulfilled. So where is this house of David today? It's the Catholic Church, one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church. It's in trouble. If you read the Old Testament, the original house of David was in trouble a lot of times. A lot of times. So many evil and corrupt kings, so many evil and corrupt high priests, so many false prophets, so much apostasy. When you look at the church today, it's the New Testament, ancient Israel. And we're having very similar problems, and even on a larger scale than what the people of God, the original Israel, had in the Old Testament. But then you've got, where is this seed of David enthroned today? Right hand of the Father. So you go to Daniel 7 and you have the prophecy of the Son of Man. And that's why Jesus called himself Son of Man. Not simply because he was true man, which he was, born of the Virgin Mary, which he was, but to give notice to his audience that he's the person prophesied by Daniel in chapter 7. The Son of Man would be lifted from the earth and seated next to the Ancient of Days in heaven. Does that sound familiar? It's the ascension of Christ into heaven from Mount Olivet. He'll be lifted from the earth and be seated at the right hand of God the Father Almighty. Then we have the prophecy in Micah 5:2. Bethlehem Ephratah, you are a little one among the thousands of Judah. That is, you're a small village. But out of thee is to come he who is to shepherd my people Israel. Now, David was a shepherd who became a king. Jesus is called a shepherd, the good shepherd who would also be a king, the more perfect David in the house of David, and born in Bethlehem. That's why you have Matthew and you have Luke emphasizing Jesus is born in Bethlehem, but they knew Jesus is coming from Nazareth. And that's why when you go to John's Gospel chapter 1, when Nathanael is introduced to Jesus for the first time, and he's told that this Jesus comes from Nazareth. Nazareth means branch. It's Branchtown. This is Bankstown, right? Nazareth is Branchtown. And Nazareth was held in contempt in the same way Bankstown is held in contempt. If there's anything good come out of Bankstown, and Nathanael said, does anything good come out of Nazareth? Okay, we used to have a school here called Nazareth. And I used to say terrible things about Nazareth College. And I used to say things like, does anything good come out of Nazareth? Maybe I was a bit harsh. But I was focusing on what Nathanael said in John 1. Okay? Nothing good comes out of Nazareth. And if Jesus came out of Nazareth and not Bethlehem, he's instantly disqualified as the Messiah. Because he's not born in the village or town of David. All right. What time can we finish? I've got about 2 hours to go. All right. Okay. What I'll do, oh gosh, very brief. I promise you I'll finish at 9. Is that all right? That clock at the back is on German time. It's fast. Your watches are on Lebanese time, so they're 20 minutes slow. My watch is correct. It's a 8:45. All right? Okay, so it's what about St. Nicholas and Santa Claus and all that? What's true and false about that? Well, St. Nicholas was true. He was a saint. He's from the 4th century. He was from the city of Myra. That's a city on the coast of southern Turkey today. And he was a bishop. He was a very orthodox bishop. He could have been Lebanese because at the Council of Nicaea he punched out another bishop, which he shouldn't have done. But we call him a saint because his faith was very strong and he defended the divinity of Christ against the Arian heresy at the time. But he was known to have been very helpful to people in need. So the legend is that this is a story, I'll read it to you. One story tells us of a poor man with 3 daughters. These daughters could not provide a dowry. The father couldn't provide a dowry for these daughters, which meant that these women would never get married. And if they never got married, they wouldn't have security in life. So what would happen? They'd either fall into poverty or to survive, fall into prostitution, which was a terrible fate for these lovely ladies. Now, mysteriously, on 3 different occasions, a bag of gold appeared in their home, providing the needed dowries. The bags of gold tossed through an open window are said to have landed in stockings or shoes left before the fire to dry. This led to the custom of children hanging stockings or putting out shoes, eagerly awaiting gifts from St. Nicholas, and so St. Nicholas is a gift giver. Now, of course, that's been all, in a sense, maybe exaggerated or corrupted today, or commercialised, that's the better word. St Nicholas is real. Probably this legend has historical foundations. Probably St Nicholas definitely worked to provide charity and help to people in need and was seen as a gift giver. So that's the remote foundation for giving gifts at Christmas, and it's built on what the wise men will do. I'll mention that in a moment. Everything else that we have, Santa Claus, etc. The Santa Claus is corrupted from Santa Nicholas, okay, and it's been commercialized by Coca-Cola from the 1920s onward. The red suit of Santa Claus is actually meant to be the bishop's clothing, a red bishop's clothing. He was a bishop. I don't see Santa Claus as a harmful thing. I see it as a nice thing to promote with kids, no big deal. You know, you've got to give kids a bit of enchanting mystery. We're not lying to them. You'll tell them by the time that they're 17 that Santa Claus doesn't really exist. And they might have a few weeks of trauma. They'll get over it eventually. All right? I never believed that Santa Claus was real, except in 1971 when I went to the Christmas tree in the morning, there was no presents there. And I thought, my dad didn't buy me anything, maybe Santa Claus will supply. But never happened. All right? Okay. The three wise men were not kings. They were magi. They were wise men. They were astrologers, which meant that they were astronomers. Astronomer were synonymous in the ancient world. Astrologer means knowledge of the stars. Astronomer means the law of the stars. Astronomy, astro, star, nomos, law. If you're an astronomer, you study the law of the stars. And if you're an astrologer, you know about this. You have knowledge of the stars. Okay? They were magoi. We get the word magician from magoi. But they weren't kings. They were certainly people who had... The ancients, when you read the Sibylline oracles, when you read Virgil, the ancient pagans were given enlightenment that one day there will appear a great figure in the world who would save humanity, who will be a glorious king, who will transform humanity. That was God. And Justin, as an apologist, Christian apologist in the mid-2nd century, believed this and said that the Holy Spirit was working among the pagans, planting seeds of truth as a preparation for the gospel. He used the term logos spermatikos, the germinating word, germinating truth among these pagans, so that when Christianity would appear in the world, it'll be better received. There'll be similitude between Christian beliefs and pagan beliefs. Christianity will come to purify and perfect pagan beliefs. And that's what St Thomas Aquinas does. You know, his philosophy, as I said at the beginning of this talk, is built on Aristotle primarily. Now, there's a lot of problems in Aristotle's writings. His physics are junk, but his metaphysics have a lot of truth there, but mixed with some error that Thomas would come later and purify. Okay. And that's what Christianity does in general. We read in Numbers 24:17, this is the prophecy of Balaam. I see him, but not now. I behold him, but not near. A star will come out of Jacob, a scepter will rise out of Israel. He will crush the foreheads of Moab, the skulls of all the sons of Seth. Now this is used, and the early church used this quote as a prophecy of the Star of Bethlehem. I don't agree with that. The star is not the Star of Bethlehem. In my opinion, the star is the Messiah. The star comes out of Jacob, that is born. Jacob has 12 sons. Judah is the 4th son. The Messiah will be a son of Judah, hence the Jews. David was of the tribe of Judah. A scepter will rise out of Israel, that is a king. This star and scepter relate to Jesus of Nazareth, Jesus Christ. Now, this could be diachronic, meaning it's a verse that could have two different meanings at the same time. If you want to say it's a prophecy of the star, okay, but I don't think you're on as much solid ground. The star and the scepter relate to Jesus as the future Messiah. Psalm 72, verses 10 to 11, talks about kings from distant lands that will bring gifts. The kings of Tarshish and of the distant shores will bring tribute to him. The kings of Sheba and Seba will present him gifts. All kings will bow down to him and all nations will serve him. You know, that's interesting. The three wise men bring gifts. The three wise men came from the east, Okay, that event fulfills this prophecy. The answer to that is yeah, very well, true, can be. But I think again it's diachronic. This is a prophecy of something bigger, not just the three wise men. You see, all the Christmas carols that tell us that the wise men were kings, we three kings, etc., are based on this psalm, which calls them kings. But they weren't kings, they were magoi, they were wise men. So this psalm, if I want to take a hardline position, does not relate to the three wise men as kings bringing gifts. It relates to a bigger prophecy, that the world powers will bow down to the Messiah as the ultimate king. Because Tarshish, in the ancient world, was the extreme western part of the known world, Spain. And Sheba was the extreme southeast, Yemen. And Seba, was opposite the Red Sea in Ethiopia. So those lands represented the extremities of the known world. So this prophecy is saying, hey, all you kings out there, one day you're going to bring gifts and you're going to bow down to the King of Kings, who's Jesus of Nazareth. Then we've got Isaiah 66, 60 verse 6, which talks about the gifts that will be given to the Messiah. See, Christians are taking these Old Testament prophecies, embedding them in their New Testament scriptures to say, these are all fulfilled in Jesus, okay? Caravans of camels shall fill you. Dromedaries from Midian and Ephah, all from Sheba will come bearing gold and frankincense and proclaiming the praises of the Lord. So, you know, the wise men, what do they bring? Gifts of gold, frankincense and myrrh. So that event fulfills this prophecy. You can say that. No problem with that. You can say that and more. Because again, I interpret this to mean this is a bigger picture. That the kings of the world and everyone else in the world will acknowledge the Messiah and bow down to him and bring him gifts. All right. What else could I say? We'll finish with, we've got 5 minutes, so we'll finish with the three wise men themselves, Caspar, Melchior and Balthazar. Not mentioned in scripture by name. There were three wise men. We say three wise men because there were three gifts. Scripture doesn't tell us there was three wise men. It tells us there were three gifts: gold, frankincense and myrrh. These gifts have enormous symbolism. Gold represented that the Messiah would be a king. Frankincense, that he would be a priest. And the myrrh, that he would suffer. Because myrrh was used in an ointment on dead bodies or to put on wounds, etc. That he would save by suffering. So Jesus embodies all three. He is a king. The Jews believed that the Messiah would be a king and a priest, but a warrior would drive out the Romans. The Messiah would be a king. He would be a priest. He wouldn't be driving out Romans. That's why he got into trouble. He said, love your enemies. Pay taxes to Caesar. How can you talk to Middle Eastern people about paying taxes? That's going to get you in big trouble, I assure you. One Lebanese student, ex-student of mine said, I said, you've got to pay taxes. Because Jesus said, give to Caesar that which is Caesar. And one of my students said, but Caesar's dead. How can you pay him taxes anymore? That exempts us from tax. It won't work in the High Court of Australia, but keep trying. So the Lebanese can get out of taxes, and they're still working on the death bit, because they say there's only two things certain in life, death and taxes. And we've managed to get out of taxes, we're working on the death bit. It's still a work in progress. All right, so Melchior, we got this tradition of the names from a 5th century, is it 5th century or 6th century Greek manuscript called the Excerpta Latina Barbari. And there are other texts called the Collectania or Excerpta et Collectania, which gives us Melchior was the king of Arabia. And he was old with a grey beard, and he brought the gift of gold, which symbolized accepting Jesus as king. And Balthazar came from Ethiopia, and he was middle-aged, and he had a beard as well, and he brought the frankincense, representing that Christ would be high priest. And Caspar was from Tarsus, which is where St Paul came from, Cilicia province, the province of Cilicia, which is southeast modern Turkey today. So you go to Syria, you go around the corner, and you get into Cilicia. And Tarsus was in Cilicia, and Caspar was a young king in his 20s who brought the gift of myrrh, which to symbolise Christ as healer and great doctor. Alright, what we'll finish on now, Christmas carols. Christmas carols began in the 4th century and they are used as weapons against heresy, singing songs about the birth of Christ and affirming his divinity, particularly against the Arian heresy. So St Ambrose up there in Milan, Archbishop of Milan, promoted a lot of singing that impacted on St Augustine. You read that in his own autobiography, and he was a big promoter of these hymns against Arianism. Ironically, it was Protestantism and the Reformation that gave a boost to Christmas carol singing, and it got another boost in the 19th century, and I think it desperately needs another boost now. So do it at home. If you're embarrassed about singing at home, get onto YouTube and play Christmas carols, you know, loud in the house so it permeates the house. I think you bring the Holy Spirit, you bring angels into the home when you've got good music. When you're playing bad music, it does the opposite. I'll tell you something I saw when I was very young on television. There used to be this documentary series on Channel 7 on Saturdays. It's called Great Mysteries of the World. And I used to watch it because it used to be after the AFL game on Channel 7. And one day they showed an episode where they had a scientific experiment where they had 2 chambers, glass chambers, the same plant in each chamber with the same temperature and the same air conditions. The only difference was the music. In the chamber where they played classical music, the plant thrived. In the chamber where they played heavy metal music like Led Zeppelin, Black Sabbath, blah, 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 the plant died. It says something to me, very important. I really believe that. So bring beautiful music into the home at Christmas time. So get onto YouTube and play beautiful music. Then afterwards look at one of my videos, that's all right. Okay. Commercialisation is a cancer that's rotting everything. It goes to an extreme. Go buy Christmas presents, buy presents for others, buy presents for yourself. You know, do what St Nicholas did, do what the wise men did. Do it, it's fantastic, but don't make it just a commercial thing. And worse than commercialisation is political correctness. There was a movie came out a few years ago, 2016, Office Christmas Party. Did anyone see that movie? Good, because you'd be expelled if you did. Jennifer Aniston, you know who she is. And in this movie, they referred to Christmas as a non-denominational holiday mix-up. We don't want to call it Christmas, that's too Christian. We've got to be more inclusive. Non-denominational holiday mix-up. Kmart recently does not call Christmas Christmas Day, calls it Family Day. Okay? And that is probably an increasingly accelerating trend. So we've got to keep Christ in Christmas. We've got to have Christmas decorations in the home. We're going to have Christmas lights outdoor, and we've got to be speaking up Christmas and Jesus Christ and Christmas constantly. On that note, we'll finish, and thank you for your patience. Thank you for your time.